Tom, welcome to the Nifty Travel Podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me on.
No, you're welcome. And one thing I like to ask everybody when they come along is what your earliest memories of travel are.
Okay, I was very deprived as a child, so I never really went abroad much. So some of my fondest memories are actually on repeat because my nan had a static caravan in this incredibly kind of beautiful campground called Kelling Heath in Sheringham in East Anglia, not far from actually where she lives in Norfolk. And my mum would take us for school holidays in the summer. And where the caravans are, it's a bit unlike other traditional caravan sites where they're just like stacked next to each other. These were all in their own little woodland. So you had like a private area where I could go out and play and just be out in nature. And so many of my memories are just being in that caravan and just having such a relaxed time with my family.
Yeah, well, you don't have to go abroad to have fun, do you?
No, just even going around the corner, you can see something a bit different than what you see on your usual day-to-day life. Yeah.
So do you think that experience sort of activated a sort of a love of travel that would come later, or would you say it was it a journey?
It definitely got me outdoors, because in a caravan, you're in quite a cramped area when you're inside. So you hope that you can spend a lot of your time outside, and especially if you're given the space and the freedom to roam. So we had bikes. So me and my sister would go off cycling around the caravan park, which was massive, and just go and get lost for the day. My parents were quite chilled about that. As long as we came back for food, that's all that mattered.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think you're speaking of a time that maybe is lost now, isn't it? I as a kid was just kicked out, come back, and just told to come back when you're hungry.
Yeah, I think there's still an element of that. I've been cycling across Europe this summer, and one of the campsites I remember in France, they put us the cycle tours. They put us in this field, which is where all the kids were playing, and the parents weren't anywhere to be seen because the parents were basically at the caravan, and so the kids had free roam again to play around all our tents, and that reminded me again of my summer holidays.
Yeah. So do you like cycling and as a form of travel?
Yeah, I think cycling is one of the best ways to explore this world. That and train travel, I think, are just great vehicles to explore. Cycling has been something that I've done a lot of. I've done a lot of cycle tours, mostly around Europe or the UK, and I just love that freedom to kind of, as long as the weather's good, wherever you want to go, you can go.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a fair weather cyclist. Uh, none of this 50 or 100 miles in the pouring rain. Some friends of
Yes,
mine.
sometimes you have to, if you have to get somewhere. I had quite a hard deadline to get to Berlin when I set off on a cycle ride from London to Berlin. That had to be done in 9 days, and meant that every day I had to be cycling about 110, 120 kilometers. So even when it rained, I had to get out a little bit. I did stop when it got heavy, but when it reduced a little bit, I still had to get out in the damp. But you just get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you love something, your level of tolerance goes up exponentially, I think.
Yeah, and rain in the summertime is a lot less worse than rain in the winter time. So I was lucky that I knew that my clothing could dry off eventually.
Yeah. So, what's it about cycling? Do you think that is better than being enclosed in a car going somewhere?
There's something about that sense of achievement you get by reaching a destination under your own steam, especially when you've had to suffer hardships along the way, whether that be the elements, which is always a condition on the bike. You've always got either sunshine, it can be quite intense, especially with me with pale skin. You could have the heat, you could have the cold, you could have wet weather, you can have wind, you have it all really when you're on the bike. And if you're willing to, I wouldn't say suffer, because I don't think I ever suffer, but you have to be a bit uncomfortable. But when you get there, when you reach your destination, there's a smile on your face that you cannot ever get by driving.
Yeah, absolutely. As a driver, motorways or freeways, whatever it is, you do see the back of somebody else rather a lot these days.
Yeah.
So, are you someone who's distracted by, cycling? You do you feel more likely to stop and notice things?
You do have to follow your nose, yeah. And quite often when I plan routes or have a route planned, you realize when you're cycling it that the route you take is only really a skeleton of what you can actually do. It's a means of getting from A to B, but it's your conscious and your subconscious, I suppose, that when you're cycling, to spot things and to travel off that route, to go and explore and see what is just around the corner that you might see, or stop at a town which maybe your route is passing through. So you have to have your senses have to be alive to kind of see, and that's when you find these amazing places that you wouldn't necessarily have found otherwise.
Yeah. So, do you have a few examples of places you've discovered and thought, "Wow, I'd never have found that if I hadn't been cycling."
Yeah, it's hard actually to think of one specifically, but uh, for instance, I was in cycling through the Netherlands only for one day on my kind of tour across to Berlin, and the cycle networks there are incredible. They're almost like motorways for bikes, and you get on one, and it will just kind of take you through the most direct route on the safest path to another town. But you forget that, again, these are just like a skeleton of what you can do, and you need to kind of stop and come off and explore the places that you pass through. So on that particular ride, I was very conscious to come off, and whenever I spotted a town on a map, just to have a little detour, come off, maybe go to a shop, have a little ride around. It doesn't take long, especially when on a bike. It doesn't take much, add on much more to your day, and then you don't know what you might find. I found some windmills, or some lovely churches, or just a nice place to sit and eat lunch.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very it gives you a very personal experience, isn't it? You're not on someone else's tour guide. This is yours.
Yeah, yeah, it becomes individual and unique to you. Yeah, you make it your own tour.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard good things about cycling around Holland, and so it's as good as they say. Then it's very cycle friendly. Would you say?
It's almost too good, actually. Yeah, yeah, you kind of get lulled into a bit of false sense of security, and then you get into another country, and it's not quite as good. The thing that I realised of why it is so good, more so than ever, because a lot of the certainly the northern European countries that I passed through had decent cycle networks, but the Netherlands is just it just has an extra level. And one thing it does do, if you're crossing like a road to get onto like another side of the road, it will have directions for you. So you look down at the road and it'd be like, okay, now you're going this way, and here's the crossing. This is the route you pass across this road, and that will take you directly onto this other cycle path. And other countries don't have that. So sometimes you'll be on a cycle path and it will end, and then you'll get onto the road being like, well, there's no cycle path anymore. And then maybe a kilometer down the road, you realize that there's actually another one hidden behind the trees on the other side of the road. So in the Netherlands, they just had this network where it always directs you. So you're never lost when you're on the cycle network.
Yes, they've obviously thought about it very carefully.
Yeah, but
So,
it's a small country though, I suppose, so that they could afford all the time and effort to do that. It makes you wonder. It would be lovely if other smaller countries, like Luxembourg, for instance, could have all of their roads mapped into a cycle network. So they're lagging behind a lot.
yeah, well, some countries like Switzerland, they prioritize, don't they, on good infrastructure. Have you been through Switzerland?
Yeah, I passed through Switzerland on my tour. So I went London to Berlin initially, and then I got a bus to Munich, and then from Munich I went south into Austria, into the Alps, and then across the Alps into Switzerland. Had a few days there, crossing some big mountain passes, and then headed north to come all the way back home. So I cycled all the way back home from Switzerland. So that was only I finished 2 weeks ago.
Oh wow! Well, it sounds like it was an exciting trip. Were you amazed by the landscapes going across the mountain ranges?
Yeah, the Austria and Switzerland were definitely the highlights. I think when I cycled London to Berlin, it's quite flat. Um, there wasn't really much in terms of inspiring landscapes or places that I passed through that were inspiring, but it was a good warm up for the mountains that were to come. And then when I got into the mountains, everywhere you looked was just a postcard. And even though it was much harder riding, a lot more hills, um, just being out in the open and being immersed in that landscape was incredible.
Mm. No, I agree. I was lucky to go to be based in Interlaken um, for a time a few years back, and I was just taken aback by, I don't know, the freshness of the landscape and actually being able to breathe properly. Um, it's very different from English life in many respects. So I noticed on your website that in your formative years you found yourself at the University of Manchester, and one of the things that you got into there was photography and filming. Was that something you were already interested in, or were you worried that university life was going to be, well, you didn't know what it was going to be like, I suppose, when you first went.
Yeah, I was very loosely into photography. I've always had photography be a big part of my life. My dad has been a photographer, and he still can develop black and white film. And my granddad as well is a photographer. He worked for Norwich City Council and has got these incredible images of Norwich in the 50s and 60s when he worked there, just documenting life and building projects that were going on. So I've always been surrounded by cameras, and I was always taught how to take decent pictures, and I was encouraged to have cameras with me. I went to university to study physics because I was very good at maths, and I love learning about science and physics in general. And physics is basically applied maths, so you actually get to do something fun with the maths. But I think the first probably first day of university, I realized that it wasn't really the future for me. And then in the second year, I got involved in student radio. So I learned that there was a kind of a creative output for my work and for my mindset. And in my first year of university, I bought myself a little handy cam because I realized it was like the best years of my life. So I wanted to document it. And at the end of the year, I had a load of footage. So I taught myself how to edit. And then the love for filmmaking kind of blossomed from there, really. And I did a lot with the student radio. I was
Mhm.
filming bands, doing live music and interviews and things like that. And just realizing that there's another avenue that I could go down in life.
Yeah, well, it's always good to have more than one route, isn't it? So, what did you see in university life that that captured your imagination at the time?
It was just that freedom to just not worry about anything in the world, especially the first year of university when you're in the halls of residence. And there's no pressure on you really to do much, just to have fun, socialize, go out a lot. So a lot of what I was filming was just my flatmates just being silly in the flat, um, and that I was just realizing, and I'm so grateful that I did capture that moment because you'll never get them back. Once you become an adult and you go out into the adult world, it's really hard to kind of rekindle that form of life again.
Yes, I guess it's a complete feeling of freedom, isn't it? So, was Manchester University, sort of like international? You got to meet people not just from the UK but from other countries.
It was mostly actually from the UK. Actually, I think I really met more international people by living in London since then. A lot of people in my flat were mostly from the UK.
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously different cities attract different, well, different kinds of students, don't they? So you've obviously got you've gained an interest in, like you say, in taking photography and doing some filming. How important do you think has the storytelling element been? Do you think
In terms of what?
in what you were capturing? Was storytelling important, and has it become more important?
It's become more important as I've kind of got older and realized that that is the real kind of heart of kind of creative projects, really, the story. I think initially I had such an analytical mind going into university that I didn't really understand what is sometimes at the heart of creative work. So a lot of my um, time coming out of university is about me adapting from an analytical mindset into a more creative mindset and learning that storytelling is at the heart of everything, and that's what people really attach to, is the story behind things.
Mm. So, do you think the storytelling can really influence people in maybe how they think, or perhaps just in the travel sense? How do you think you can influence people to take certain types of trips, or what do you think?
It's so integral, isn't it? People need to attach themselves to a story. They're always seeking it. Storytelling has been part of humanity since the very beginning. With the same stories exist and have existed for thousands of years, just in different forms. It's just evolved in how we tell them or in what shape they take. But generally, I think there's something like 7 or 8 different actual storylines that you can attach any single story to. And um, who loves, when traveling, to hear the history and the story behind why something is why it is? It helps us understand it, and whether or not that story is true or not, it's the one thing that we remember and we get excited by, is being able to tell that to someone else when we get home. And storytelling is this kind of like chain of, like, people love to hear stories, but then they love to tell it to someone else, so it becomes this chain of like storytelling along the route.
Mm. So, one thing I found interesting, because I love reading the sort of biographies of people, because people are endlessly interesting. And I came across a book by Michael Palin, who loves a bit of travel now and then, and I noticed that he not only does programs, but he likes to write books, and he even narrates his own work. And the thing I found fascinating was that the same story was different 3 times over. Um, how do you think that relates to what you do? Does it make it easier, more interesting?
What do you mean by, which story was it in particular?
Well, he did a trip to Iraq, and he did like a 2 or 3 part series. Uh, but he also narrated the story, and he wrote a book about it. And it was like reading the story 3 different ways,
I see. Okay, yeah, in 3 different forms. Yeah,
and it was like 3 different trips all in one.
right. Yeah, I can relate to that a lot, because not only do I do photography and filmmaking, but I also write as well. And there's all these different ways that we consume stories now, whether it's through the written word, through visual medium, through art, or through theatre or social media. And I did a postgraduate in broadcast journalism, which is kind of like TV and radio news and online news as well. You got taught that even within TV and radio and online, there are 3 different ways that you had to present that information to people. And it was, again, the same information, but the way that you presented it had to be different across those 3 medium. And so the way in which we consume stories is so varied, and therefore the way in which you tell it through that medium has to change as well.
No, I thought it really fascinated me, because I thought, well, you can deliver a different perspective.
Yeah, and you think about how a picture can paint 1,000 words, for instance, and sometimes that's all you need, right? Is that imagery, and that can be super dramatic, and that can tell a story itself. But if you don't have that access to showing someone a picture, and it's just in the written word, then you have to work so much harder to paint that image in someone's mind. Or sometimes you have to not realize that you're not trying to paint that picture, but you're enabling someone to paint that picture in their mind. What that might be in their mind might be completely different to what you're trying to paint to them. But that allowance that you just need to give them that kind of theme and that tone of what you're trying to tell, and allow their mind to kind of take that information and extrapolate it into their imagination.
Yes, because yes, what you present may mean something completely different to them, mightn't it?
Yeah.
So, do you ever find that when you look back at photography or film, that you see something you didn't see at the time?
No. No, I think different people, someone else will have a different meaning and purpose and see something from it. For me, when I'm working with photography and film, especially in filmmaking, I'm seeing something 1,000 times over before it gets published. And so by then you're seeing it only a certain way. It's only when someone else sees it and they take something different from it, that's when you maybe understand it differently. But it's really hard to do that in your own mindset when you've been working towards a certain kind of goal to get something published, and to shape it into a certain way which you're trying to kind of pair what's in your mind with with the resources you have. So it's really hard to actually see it in a different way until someone else kind of points stuff out for you.
Yeah. So, no, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's just that, as someone who likes to travel, I often take pictures and videos, and I'm so focused on the reason why I'm in a particular place. Yeah, I sometimes forget that there's other things going on around you. Um, I guess in your work, Tom, you become a person who notices things. So, would you say that's an important part of what you do? I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the important part for everyone does actually, is noticing the here and now. I mean, just this morning I was on a walk in Wimbledon Common, and I was just going down a little hill into the woodlands, and just saw to the left of me this incredible tree. It was just an oak tree, but it looked like it'd been there for at least 100 years. Really old tree. And I just took a moment to appreciate it. I was like, that's a spectacular tree. And I bet most people on their morning walk, especially regular morning walk, just walk past it without actually realizing and taking stock of just how special it is.
Mm. No, I do agree. It's uh, going out in nature is a special is a special pastime. We shouldn't avoid it. So, taking a bit of a different tack here. So, when you go on your journeys, do you ever are you someone who likes to plan everything in masses of detail, or are you a more spontaneous person?
I operate on both parts actually. I think I've learned over time that it's really important to do as much planning and research as you can. Just especially if you're going to the far-flung areas of the continent, somewhere far away that you're never going to return to again. And so I've done. I spent 2 weeks in Japan, and I meticulously planned the entire journey. Um, to the point where it became this kind of almost like a tour that we would have, bought onto, but we did it ourselves. And I had various different options of what we could see. I calculated all the trains to take it there, and I look back on that journey in Japan, and there's nothing I would change about it or nothing I regret. We did everything we wanted to do, and went to these most incredible places, which were not necessarily the most popular places that you would think of going, but if you did your research, for instance, we arrived in Tokyo just at the end of the cherry blossom bloom, but the cherry blossom blooms later in the north of the country. So, and because the Japanese train networks is fantastic and super fast and efficient, I knew that I could get a bullet train all the way to the north of the country the next day, and then come back to Tokyo that same day. I think it was about nearly a 5-hour trip one way. So it was almost 10 hours on the train just to have this day trip. We went to this amazing place called Hirosaki, which in my research, it's a small town, wouldn't really know what it's famous for. It's just really good apples. You come out of the train station, there's a big giant apple statue, clearly famous for that. But it's got this one park in town, which has probably about 1,000 cherry blossom trees. So it's the most concentrated area of cherry blossom. So we went there just to go to this park and walk around this park during the cherry blossom bloom. And it was incredible. Just the amount of cherry blossom you couldn't look for it. You couldn't see it. It was everywhere. And that's an example of how doing your research, you find this amazing place that when you hit the ground, for instance, in Tokyo, and realize that you've missed the cherry blossom there, you've got options. Like, okay, well, I did my research and I know we can get a bullet train all the way to the north, see this amazing cherry blossom, then come back to Tokyo that night and still stay in the hostel that we've booked, for instance. But also, I've just set off on my 4-week bike tour. Didn't really plan a lot. I took my tent, camped along the way. I was planning day by day where I was meant to go. I used a route planning app, so I didn't even have much of an idea. I knew I needed to get to Berlin because I was running a 10K race with friends, and then after that, I knew I wanted to go to the Alps, and that was really the only thing I planned. So a lot of it was kind of hit and run on the day.
Do you think a lot of people just follow the crowd and are actually missing a lot of our world?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some beauty in that because there's clearly a reason why there's a crowd there. But I'm always someone who likes to go against the grain and find my own way. And usually if you follow the crowd, then you're going to get a whole infrastructure that's kind of tailored towards kind of suiting that crowd, but that's not necessarily the most authentic experience you're going to get in a foreign place. And I love, for instance, when staying in a city, I love getting Airbnbs out in the kind of more kind of urban areas outside of the city, where commuters live, and just like learning how they live their lives, and going to the coffee shops that they go to, and the grocery stores that they go to, and trying to live a life that's kind of more kin to what a localer would live, as opposed to just staying in a hotel in the center of town. It's been delivered this package, which actually isn't an authentic experience.
Yes. So you love going out and doing a bit of a discovery of whatever local area you happen to find yourself in there.
Yeah, and that's when you find these places of joy, which might not be the most spectacular things in the world, but they'll mean something more to you because you've had a unique experience with them, as opposed to just seeing, ticking off the checklist of the main, top 5 things to see in a city.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I did a road trip in New South Wales, Australia, and I actually got asked by a lady at a homestead, why are you here? I said, well, I'm your only customer, so hopefully that's one good reason. But I was just choosing places at random to go and stay at, and that's very interesting. When the reason I asked about crowds is that when you go off the beaten track, you can actually be the only person somewhere. And I find that, I mean, Australia is so different to to England, it's in England you can sometimes not know where things begin and end, but in Australia it's very differently the edge of town, and you go from one to the other, and it's completely different in seconds. So, are there countries and destinations that you've so enjoyed that you've felt that you've needed to go back again?
I'd go back to Japan again in a heartbeat. Absolutely adored the country. Incredible food, incredible history, incredible culture. Everyone was very kind to me as a foreigner. Amazing technology. The train system is unreal. It's worth it just to go and experience that. I'd love to go back to the Alps more, do some more cycling around there. I really kind of felt at home in the mountains when I was there. Yeah. One thing that's actually been, I realized on my bike tour recently, so I hadn't left the country in 5 years. Traveled the world quite a lot, but since COVID and just before COVID was the last time I traveled, and various things in my life that meant that I've just not left the country in that time. I also, in that exact same time, changed my diet, so I now eat a plant-based diet. So I've become very comfortable doing that at home, and have now a whole encyclopedia knowledge of a different type of food that I eat. I struggled doing that on the continent in some countries. The German countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, were quite good to me, but I found France very difficult. And before I turned plant-based, I was vegetarian. I did cycle across France and managed. I think I must have eaten fish at the time because I remember eating mussels. But really struggled when I was cycling through France to find food that I could eat. Even trying to find tofu, which is generally like a plant-based kind of staple, was very difficult because all their supermarkets, they have like 10 aisles of cheese. when we have one, they have 10. So I found that very difficult, and that unfortunately has a bit of an impact on how I experience countries now. Is my diet has changed, and can they have allowance for that? I did make some allowances, and I wasn't 100% strict because I knew I needed to eat. I was cycling 100 plus kilometers every day, and even though I'd have some cereal in the morning, I needed more food, so I would allow myself to eat pastries. Just because I needed some substance to get me going. But other kind of at lunchtime or at dinner time, most of the options were cheese based, and I just probably, if I was desperate, I would eat it, but I tried not to.
Yeah. Well, we is it true that we are what we eat?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a lot of people who don't go plant based kind of hold up cheese as like the reason for that, and I get you. It is delicious, but I've learned that it's not part of a healthy diet. So in that sense, I'm more than happy to get rid of it. And like you say, like if all you're eating is just this kind of greasy, fatty, cheesy substance, then yeah, it's not going to do you wonders. But that's my personal kind of belief.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're visiting different countries, Tom, do you notice the I don't know the different sights and sounds that make a place unique?
Yeah, I'm calling back to Japan again now. Every single train station, especially in like the urban areas, like for instance in Tokyo, every train station had its like own little jingle. So every time you stopped at a station, you just hear this little different tune, and I think it's to help people who were asleep, because a lot of the culture of Japan is they are completely overworked. So when they're on public transport, they do spend a lot of it asleep. So there is definitely like a good old sing along. Me and my partner at the time were singing along to the station that we were staying by. That was a very fond memory. Being up in the Alps as well, you just hear the clattering of the bells that the carriers are wearing as you're cycling along. You can just hear that kind of echoing in the valley, as you can hear the streams as well that I was cycling up against as well. That was always nice.
Yeah. No, I asked it because you can usually tell what city's been presented to you by the sound of the pedestrian crossings. They all seem to like there was one in Hong Kong that was quite distinctive, and Australian ones have a particular pulsing sound.
Yes.
And it's funny what you remember. I did like a day cycling in out of Adelaide, and apart from having to remember to keep my mouth shut all the time because lots of mozzies were following me everywhere, it was, I don't know, it was just the sound of silence because yeah, driving is such a noisy activity. So you've mentioned trains a few times. So do you like to experience different train journeys when you go to different places?
I haven't been on too many. I just hold Japan up there because at the time you could buy I think you still do it. You buy a Japanese rail pass, which is super cheap, which gave you unlimited travel across most of their network for 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how long you wanted it for. And I mean, their trains are some of the best in the world. They're punctual and efficient. They're super comfy. Everyone faces the direction of travel, which is important. And at the end of the train journey, someone comes around and spins all the chairs around. They do like a 180. And I think our network of trains is phenomenal. We can go anywhere in the UK by train. Whether or not the service is lovely, or the punctuality is correct, or the comfort level is there, or even like if you can get a seat, is a different thing altogether. But yeah, other than that, I don't think I've actually done much train travel other than in Japan.
Yes. Well, Switzerland is a good comparison, isn't it?
I definitely cycled alongside a lot of amazing train routes, which wasn't a nice thing to see, because when you are putting the effort going up a hill and you see this train of like tourists go by with this like panoramic windows waving at you from the comfort of an air-conditioned cabin while you're sweating in the heat.
Whilst they're drinking a glass of wine. Or
Yeah,
something.
it did look phenomenal actually, and it did make me realize even actually you could even I knew another cyclist who was going off cycling really, really far just to get the train back again the next day or that evening, because they just put trains anywhere. So even across the Marriott passes, there's trains that go there. They put them on. They can go up like super steep inclines. It's incredible.
And I think their trains are very cycle friendly, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, it can get space. Yeah, you can put your bike in there. Yeah.
No, I was very impressed with their system. In fact, so impressed because some friends of mine, they went with the Air Swiss and they checked in at Heathrow, and it takes your bags all the way. I was very impressed with that as a a method to encourage you to go visit their country. So, with all these journeys you go on, Tom, do you find that you have a routine that works for you in terms of how you navigate all the different well, travel touch points that you have to go to? I often, if I go to an airport, for instance, you see lots of lost people, don't you? Like they're just totally not used to the concept of travel. They love to go traveling, but they get lost rather easily. Do you have your own system?
I think I would be one of them at the moment because I haven't flown in 5 years. So there were periods in my life when I was taking many flights in a year, especially with work. And I was that kind of person who was just like, had the system of like, okay, yeah, I whip my laptop out, 5 minutes before we're meant to be checked and go through. But now I think I'd be one of those lost people not knowing what to do. And like, what am I meant to take liquids or not? I'm not sure now because I haven't flown in that long.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Do you find it's interesting watching other travelers?
Yeah, I think depends what mood you're in and why you're waiting at an airport. Sometimes you can be waiting there for a delayed flight, and then suddenly you just get everyone's bad moods coming out.
Yeah. Well, I like sitting in coffee shops. It just seems to be a good excuse to see what's happening,
Yeah.
what everybody else is up to. So, going back to your university days, you got into radio. What did you get out of conversations, and how's that kind of shaped you going forward?
For me, student radio is more about having a creative outlet at university. And it was about mixing with an incredible group of people, making new friends within the radio community, um, and just having fun by experimenting and learning how to fail. I mean, I had a radio show which went out on FM, so it's broadcast across Manchester. Um, had it for 4 weeks, and it was a terrible radio show. I mean, I think I've got recordings somewhere, but if I listened back to it, it would make me cringe how bad I was. But I was given that opportunity at university to have a go and to be rubbish, knowing that that was the first kind of step of actually how you could build to be better going forward and learn from doing. And most of what I knew at the time, I didn't really know how to do a radio show. But then I came out of this and went into, I worked at BBC Radio West Midlands for a short while after doing my postgrad. So I learned then how to actually do it properly. And so for me, that was really more about just having this space. A bit like how I said about Freshers Year, how you just don't have any pressure on you. It's the same at the radio. You just, if you were good enough to get a show, then just have fun playing with it and trying and experimenting with things.
Yeah, and of course now you like to not only do photography and filming. You're now into production, aren't you? The whole sort of cycle. So tell us a bit about what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of things have come full circle actually. So yeah, learning about how to broadcast TV and radio news, you do a lot of interviewing. But when I worked in the newsroom in radio, that just wasn't really environment for me. I like more kind of long form projects. So I had to step out of that, and I eventually found my way into doing corporate film in London, which I've been doing for nearly 12 years now, as well as doing other forms of filmmaking. But that's how I've been making a living. But in recent times, I guess just before COVID, I was just trying to find ways that I could do my own projects. And one of them has been starting the podcast, the Great British Adventures podcast, where I do long form interviews, sometimes about 2 hours long, with incredible people who have amazing stories to tell. These are people with adventure mindsets, people who've gone on changes of path or on incredible journeys in life, and just talking to them about their story and what is in their mind and how they process different things.
Yeah. What do you think it is about adventure people like listening to?
Well, I think this is my kind of 2 cents on adventure. I think if you, no matter what hardship you face in life, if you can put that word adventure in front of it, then it changes your mindset and how you approach it. Because when you go on an adventure, it's meant to be fun and exciting, and you go into the unknown, but you know that you're going to come out of it with hopefully an incredible experience. And I think the same could be put on anything in your life. I mean, I obviously went on my own adventure this summer, cycling around Europe. But even within that, on each day, I would face my own adventures as I came across different hardships or as I struggled with certain things that I had to deal with. And these are things which might get someone down or feel like everything's going against them. But for me, it was part of the bigger adventure. And it was all part of, okay, this has been thrown at me. how can I use my skills, my knowledge, my experience, my foundation to get through it with a positive mindset and hopefully laugh about it and have great stories to tell afterwards.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that happened, which is a small thing, but in the context, it's really tragic. As I was cycling back to the UK, I just got into France. I was really struggling to find things to eat. I got to a campsite where not many people spoke English, and I was cooking the last of my pasta. And I went, I had a little pot next to my tent cooking up this pasta. And I went to go get something from my bike, which is about 5 meters away. And as I got up, some kid was behind my tent and he was playing hide and seek with his friends. I thought it was super cute. I walk over to my bike, but the next thing I hear is like this kerfuffle and this clunk. And I turn around and this kid has jumped over my tent, not knowing that my hot stove is on the other side. And he'd knocked it all over. Thankfully, he was fine because he'd knocked over some boiling water. But suddenly, all of my pasta was on the floor. My stove that was cooking the food had bent, so I couldn't use that in the form that it was. So I had this moment where I just didn't have any food and I was hungry, I was tired, it was late. I could have gone into town, but I was just too tired to do that. So just had to take a moment just to think worse things happen in life. Like, I'm fine, the kid is fine. And I just picked up all these little bits of pasta from the floor and went to the kind of washroom, washed them like 10 times. And then I had to like hold my pot of pasta above my stove because that's the only way I could actually get it. It wouldn't sit on because the things had broke. And I eventually cooked my pasta. And now it's just a story I could tell. But at the time, I saw my food on the floor and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm starving, hungry, I'm tired, and I just don't need to deal with this now. And my stove is broke, and the next day was Sunday, and everything is shut on a Sunday. So suddenly you start thinking of all these horrible things that can happen, and making your situation feel worse than it actually is. But actually, if you can just stop, breathe, and think about the steps you can take to alleviate the situation, then you can get by. And I did.
Mind is a very powerful thing that we carry around with us, isn't it? It can determine outcomes very strongly. Do you think there's a very particular thing about adventure that could be said to be British, or is everybody got the spirit of adventure in them?
Everyone has the spirit. I don't want to go too deep into like into how the Brits have tried to own it. I don't think that's really fair. But yeah, I think everyone has that within them, and it's unique, and eventually is unique to us. It doesn't have to be these grand tours that you're crossing a country by foot or by bike. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be going for a walk in your local park and actually just taking a different path and just seeing what's around this corner, which you've not been down to, or just walking some different streets in your local neighborhood. That can be an adventure.
Yeah, I think we can sometimes be creatures of habits, can't we? I look at certain journeys I've taken over time. I lived in one place for 50 years, and then in my final week there, somebody mentioned a village I'd never been to, and you think, well, how did I not see it over that 50-year period? Just because I was used to going one particular way, and I think there's so much to see in the world, isn't there? I think you have to accept you can't see everything, but choose the things that you think might be interesting. Talking about trains again, I like to sometimes find old train routes because we seem to have rather a lot of them in the UK. But a lot of them are now on the national cycle network, so it's a good way to see the country.
Yeah, I often wonder what life would be like if all those old train networks were reconnected. Because there's one near my parents, and I know that used to go into the main town. So when I was looking on a map and I was tracing the kind of old kind of shadow of this train route, I saw that it kind of reconnected with the main train route coming out of town. I was like, wow, getting into town would be so much easier if that was the station there. But it's lovely that now all these old places are are now walkways or cycle networks, and get people out in nature as well.
So you talked a bit about your podcast. So it's what do you find that's what do you get out of talking to lots of other people?
Yeah, I learn so much from every single person. I do in-person conversations as well, so I really get this special moment when I'm present in the middle of their story, and I really can understand kind of what is at the heart of it. And sometimes actually it's only in the edit when I even learn even more, when I re-listen back to it. I learn so much from different people, and every single episode has got something that I take from it. Generally, I guess this is the general heart of someone going off into the unknown, and just knowing that eventually it will be all okay at the end is generally what I take out of it.
Yeah, and maybe different. And people look at places differently, don't they? Um, it, I think that one of the uh, things about living in one place for a long time is it can make you slightly complacent about it, can't it? You stop seeing the place that you live in the way a visitor would see it. Do you find that you kind of miss? You mentioned you enjoyed a walk across the park this morning, but do you think other people just get so go in such a routine that they really only activate their senses when they go somewhere else?
You need that new energy, don't you? It's why hanging out with kids is incredible, because kids to see the things that you don't see, and they ask the questions that you don't think to ask. And I guess part of how we can all um, rediscover things in our own life is have that childlike mentality of just knowing that, not knowing all the rules in life, and that's sometimes a good thing. That you can just go off and just do something, and where you think the barriers are, just go past them a little bit and just see what life is like on that other side. But yeah, if you can be more childlike, just skip around and go and explore, go run into some bushes and see what's through there.
Yeah. Well, I just brushed past a father and his son in town the other day, and in the 5 minutes it took me to walk past them, the kid had asked his dad 5 questions. Just thought it was. I just think it's so good, isn't it? To see that part of childhood hasn't disappeared from the society.
Yeah.
So, talking about the future of travel now, how do you think it's going to change?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Especially in the world of climate change now, to understand all our impact on how we travel. I can't talk generally. I would love for there to be something that comes from the top down, rather than to put the onus on the individual. I don't know what that's going to look like, but for me personally, there needs to be purpose and meaning and significance in travel now, so that if I'm going to go get on a flight, which I will do at some point, I haven't flown in 5 years, but some point in the near future, I will have to, for whatever reason, and I'll have to make peace with that. It'll be understanding, like, what is the purpose of this travel. So, for instance, I got invited to go on a trail running weekend in Mallorca with some friends, and I've declined because it's just a weekend, and I know that I can have that exact same experience at home. And so, for me, it doesn't warrant the flight, even though it's a short haul flight, there and back in a few days, just to see a place that I probably won't experience to its fullest. So for me, it's like, if I'm going to go somewhere, how can I make sure that I'm going to get the most out of that journey? And if I feel like I'm not, if it's just a fleeting visit, then what is really the bigger purpose of that? And do I need to? And that for me is how I think I choose to travel now.
Yeah. Sustainable is a word that gets thrown around a lot more now. And I watched a few programs of a guy going around Australia, and he was experiencing different ways that could happen. For instance, he visited a homestead and they grew absolutely everything their restaurant needed on site, and anything that wasn't needed was recycled. But of course, the limitations of it was they could only serve so many customers at a time, but the experience was really good for customers because they grew like 20, 30 varieties of lettuce, and no one ever had the same meal twice. And it looked a great experience. Another was, this guy visited a remote island that's suffers from potentially rising seawater, and they had a scheme that visitors were contributing towards the protection of the islands that they were living on. Do you think sustainable travel's got a future?
Yeah, it's hard to know whether it's kind of just been branded, right? And what really is the general impact. It's a difficult one. I don't know really the big answer. I've probably got some strong views on it. I would just like each individual to really consciously consider the purpose of their travel and the reason and a real deep heart reason why they are choosing to go somewhere. Can they get that same experience, for instance, in the UK or closer to home, or taking a different form of transport? But at the same time, I've done more than my fair share of global travel, and I understand that your world just widens when you can go off and see how people live in foreign lands, and how that experience shapes your perspective when you come back home. But most of the foreign travel I've done long haul has been over a considerable amount of time, and you get to really understand a place when you do that.
You do. No, I absolutely love travel and get as much in as I possibly can. Well, Tom, it's been amazing having a chat to today.
Thanks, Alex.
And I wish you well on your podcasting. I think it's a fascinating thing that we share, and it's it's a great way of finding out about people and getting perspectives. So
absolutely, yeah. Conversation is key, I think, in everything, in all of the world.
We should all talk more.
Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you again, and good luck in the future.
All the best to you, Alex. Thank you.